Welcome, I'm your host, Malcolm Gallagher. From our BizVision studios in the UK, you're watching the Leadership Matters Business Show on the BV-TV network. All over the world, business leaders are struggling to understand and cope with workplace changes. Now, these are not just physical changes, but operational, mental, emotional. How to make changes humanely is a question that I've encountered time and again in my coaching work for BizVision and in my interviews for our BV-TV network. Well, my guest today is likely to have the answers. She's known as the workplace fixer. She's a mastermind in transforming dysfunctional workplace cultures into an ideal place to work. Her personalized strategies work to create profitable businesses, produce productive employees, and build engaged teams. Wow. Let's meet LaShawn Davis. Welcome, LaShawn.
Hi, Malcolm. Thank you so much for having me.
Lovely to see you. Lovely to see you. Now, let's start off with my questions. I've teased my viewers in the opening piece about you. So please fill that a bit further for us. What you do, how you do it, and who for. Oh, and why the name HR Plug?
Well, first, I do have some teenage kids, right? And anything that they get something, they call it the plug. So if I want to get some new shoes, I go to the shoe plug. If I want to get, something new, I find the plug for that. So the HR plug derived because I am the plug for all things HR. So if leaders, employees, or whoever needs anything that has to do in the HR realm, I am the plug for that. And so that is why the name the HR plug exists. And who I am and what we do is we support small businesses and mid-sized businesses kind of foster a relationship, a workplace culture, and train leaders on how to manage those cultures so that they can be rewarding. And the business gets what they need, which are the results and productivities from their greatest asset, employees. And so we empower leaders, we support leaders, and we build leaders to help them own what they're supposed to do as a leader so that their teams can thrive in the environments that are rewarding.
Wow. Now, listen, the business world is, I'm using the word altered, forget new normal. Business world is altered. And I guess leaders have had to change to embrace lots of new skills, such as remote leadership. What do you think the top 3 new people skills will be needed by good and effective leaders in this altered world?
Wow, the top 3. There's so many, Malcolm, but if I narrowed it down to 3, I think the first thing I would say is communication. Communication is quite critical, especially in remote worlds where we don't have the advantage any longer of the eye and the physical connection with people, seeing them every day, right? And it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. So those communication skills definitely have to be revved up. We have to find ways to stay in tune and in touch so that we can make sure that our employees are feeling valued and needed today in the environment. So communication, I would say number 2, attached to that would be listening. So communication is one thing, how you give messages, how you deliver messages, your tone, your body language, your facial expressions and video. But the second piece to that is how well are you listening? Are you really listening to what your employee, your partner, your vendor, your peers, your coworkers, whoever you're working with, are you listening to what they're telling you? And is your response aligned with what their need is in their ask, right? So communication, definitely a non-negotiable. And in that, I would say listening. And then finally, I would say number 3, adaptability. You have to understand that leadership is not a one-size-fits-all response. You have to be adaptable to who your employees are as people, what their needs are as workers, and how you can not necessarily turn yourself into a pretzel trying to please everybody, but how you can tailor your leadership style to best align with what they need from you at that moment. And so what that looks like, Malcolm, is if I have an employee who needs that phone interaction, that voice interaction. They need to hear me and see me and talk to me, whether video or on the phone. But then I have another employee who might be very well with email communication. I can email them, they get it, and they move on. Does that mean that I'm supposed to email all of my employees? No, I have to be adaptable to what that need is for that individual employee so that I can effectively lead them. And so when you communicate well, When you listen, it prepares you to be adaptable. It prepares you to be the type of leader that your employee needs from you. Those are the top three things I can think of, Malcolm, that I think leaders definitely need in this new normal, in this new environment, right, that we're
Yeah.
facing today.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, LaShawn, that there's many more than that, but I needed to
Yeah.
keep a few back so I can talk to you again some other time, but I'm certainly with you on the listening, by the way. When I first did my first sales training, which was with Mattel Toys, which is an American company, they told me, Malcolm, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in that order. And
Yeah.
I didn't quite understand, but later on, I also learned then start to listen attentively, people will listen, but it just goes through. Yeah. Look, I've had
Right.
some horrible bosses in my past, old traditional bullies. Are such people still around? And if so, how do you recognize them? What do they look, sound, and act like?
Sure. Absolutely. They're still here, unfortunately, Malcolm. But in a sense, then it gives me job security, right?
Yes,
So,
yeah.
but yeah, they're still around. And a lot of the reason why they exist, honestly, is because we've become accustomed to promoting people based on how well they can do a job and how good they are at doing something, not necessarily preparing them for the component that requires them to relate to people. That requires them to inspire people, that requires them to motivate people. So we're missing that layer. And when that happens, birth are the leaders, I use that term lightly, who can get the job done because they know how to do it, but not necessarily know how to get other people to function under them. And when that happens, that's when we get the bullies. That's when we get the people that people don't want to work for. That's when we get the toxic work environments. So how you recognize that? It's when you have the leaders who take a lot but don't give anything. If they're continually taking the credit for something that you did, or they're continually taking from you your time, asking you to make sacrifices, but they're not doing it, that's one of the signs that you are working for someone who may not necessarily be a strong leader. Secondly, they do a lot of dictating, but they don't demonstrate. They do a lot of telling you, and they're not asking you. And so when you see these signs of people who are constantly, Malcolm, you need to go do this, and you need to get it done to me by this time, that's not leadership. That's bullying. Right? If their voices are elevated and they're yelling because they don't know how to maintain their emotions, and they don't have emotional intelligence, that's not leadership. That's bullying. You should never yell. You should never speak to someone in a way that you wouldn't want to be spoken to, let alone somebody that you love be spoken to. So if you're finding that you're in a culture or a situation and you're being yelled at, you're being belittled, you're being not given credit for the things that you've been doing, you don't feel like you have a voice, you give an opinion or you give a suggestion and it's ignored, all of these are signs of a toxic work culture, that you're working with a leader who may not be the best fit for your learning style. And so those are things to look out for, Malcolm, that I would definitely suggest. And if you're facing that, the advice I would give, because I never like to say what it is and not tell you what to do, have a conversation.
Yeah.
Address it.
Listen, just between you and me,
Yeah.
and everybody else that's listening, I've got this piece of paper dating back to 1970 when I was working for as a salesman for a toy company, not Mattel, another one, UK. And each week the sales director would send a newsletter out. And this particular week he sent out the newsletter and it says, Gallagher, not Malcolm, by the way, Gallagher is number 1 this week. Let's hope he keeps it up rather than his usual pathetic effort.
Wow.
Real motivational, eh? Yeah.
Right.
But at the moment, this is 2020 now, it's just been released that 40% of people in the UK, employees in the UK, 40% are looking for new jobs because of a lack of support by their leaders during the pandemic. Now, the old saying is, managers do things right and leaders do the right things. Is this still relevant in our new age of technology? Also, with so many lean startups doing every job, is there a blurring of the distinction between leaders and managers?
I think that society is beginning to blur that, but there's definitely a distinction. And I think leaders really need to recognize where they fall. Are you truly a leader or are you a manager? And so the biggest challenge with that, Malcolm, is people don't know the difference. And so I think the way you think about it and to determine how am I functioning and how am I performing, you are a leader if you are setting the vision, establishing the vision, defining the strategies to meet this vision, and you are managing if you are just following a path that's already been set by the leader. So if you're coming into work and you are just doing what you've been told, you're not autonomously functioning, you're not thinking independently, you're not being innovative and finding new ways to do things, you're functioning, you're just managing something, whether that's a people or a process. Leaders take it the next step. They don't take what's just been given and do. They take what is existing and they build upon, they stretch, they expand. And so if you find that you're coming and everything is black and white, you're doing what's already been set, and it's been done this way for the last 20 years, you're managing something. You're not leading it. And so in order for us to be effective and function as true leaders, we first need to self-evaluate. How am I functioning in my role? Have I been doing something that someone told me to do and I'm calling myself a leader? Or did I design this? Did I create the vision and I'm inspiring other people to build this vision with me? Then I'm leading. So Malcolm, it's important to differentiate how you're functioning yourself to determine, are you leading or are you managing, so that we can unblur these lines, especially in this new technology-faced world that we're in today.
LaShawn, brilliant piece of advice, brilliant. Now, motivation is key, but I suggest you've got to be careful how you do it. For example, some incentives can soon be seen by employees as their right. What's the best way to motivate a team?
Well, first, I can tell you, in my experience, Malcolm, the biggest complaints from employees who feel that they're not being motivated or they're not motivated is that leaders pick and choose a favorite, and they tend to lean on that person more for motivation versus holistically the whole team. And so in order to be an effective motivator, you can't just rely on the ones you know will get the job done. You have to find ways to get the job done out of everybody on your team. And the number one way to doing that is to get to know your people. Get to know your team. I cannot stress that enough, because and when I say get to know them, I mean just a little bit outside of your day-to-day work world. When is their birthday? What do they enjoy? Were they going on vacation? Ask them how it went. Did they enjoy it? Little things like that make people feel like they belong. When they feel like they belong, there's nothing that they won't do for you when they trust you. The way to build that trust is to get to know them. And once you have that trust, anything you ask them to do, they'll be willing to do, because they think of you as someone who respects them. And then your motivating isn't a chore. It's something that will come naturally because you took the time to get to know who they were. So don't think of motivation as something more I have to do. Now I got to figure out, how do I get them to do this faster? Or how do I get to do this, by not spending as much payroll or as much money? Don't think of it that way. Think of, how do I get to know what motivates and drives Malcolm as a person? What does he enjoy? And then how do I build that into my communication with him, my relationship with him, so that he can spark. Malcolm loves his kids. Let me talk about his kids and see how they're doing, so then he knows that I care about him. So motivating has everything to do with the relationship that you have with your employee or your colleague. And once you have that relationship, motivating comes secondhand.
Very good. And spot on the kids, by the way, but actually it's grandchildren. Now, leaders inspire and cause action has always stuck in my brain. But does that really develop a team? Surely in today's compassionate and conscious world, there's more to inspiring greater performance than in the usual older way of a PowerPoint presentation.
Right. That won't even work today. Most of the generational Zs don't even know what a PowerPoint is, right? They know Google Slides, but not a PowerPoint. But nonetheless, yeah, absolutely. Leadership is really not doing. It's getting done without doing. So there is definitely still, some truth to that. But performance isn't how well you perform as an individual. Performance is how well your team performs, because that is a reflection of you. The leader who tolerates the employee who's not performing is only building their poor reputation as a leader. And so in order to get that performance out of others and inspire them and motivate them, again, it goes back to a little bit what we talked about earlier, getting to know your team, but it's also being somebody that is respectable, being somebody that people can admire, and being somebody that is the go-to for problems and issues. I think the biggest mistake that leaders make that dive into their inability to get performance out of their teams is to treating their team like robots or just like people who work and just get a result and go home.
Yeah.
That's not where we are today. You no longer are the days where people are staying at a job for 20 years. You find people that leave every couple of years. Why? Because they're not challenged, they're not motivated. You're not going to talk to them any kind of way. You're not going to treat them any kind of way. So now we got to change that, right? There's no longer are the days of, you need to be grateful that I gave you a job, now do what I say. That doesn't exist anymore. So leaders have to find ways now to attract great talent, but then sustain great talent, keep that talent to avoid turnover, which is a costly expense. And the way to doing that is being a leader that people respect. So think about what respect means to you and foster that in your encounters and interactions with your team. Then you'll get that performance. Then you'll get that buy-in. Then you'll get the credibility that is necessary for you to truly walk and act as a defined leader by definition.
Brilliant. Now, here at BizVision and BV-TV Network, we are truly and committed and focused on the conscious business agenda with our Conscious Business Academy, a Conscious Business Show, a Conscious Leader, and so on. How do you convince, though, a hardened, wizened, traditional board of directors, when you've woke them up, by the way, that diversity and inclusion is not some silly compliance requirement, but will bring the business real benefits, profits, reputation, if it invests in developing diversity and inclusion across its activity?
Really, the language, I call it, that C-suite, those executives understand is numbers. And so the best advice I can give in that regard is pull the data. Show them the financial impacts of when you don't diversify your teams, that it causes you to be left behind and you can no longer be competitive with competition. What do I mean by that? Diversity is more than just race, right? Diversity is what I look like, but it's also my experiences, which comes throughout different ages. It's also my background, the country that I'm from, and some practices that might work well where I'm working that I don't know because I'm not from where you're from. So diversity is really embracing everything that's different about people. And the more you can embrace differences, the different avenues you're able to run and move to affect different consumers, different clients, different customers. People want to buy from places that they can relate to. If you fail to give someone relatable or an idea that's relatable to them, then you're going to lose that customer and you're going to lose that buyer. But the best way to show that is through the numbers. What data can I pull to show in this market, we have X% of this type of person? And because we have 70% of these types of people, we need to make sure that that's reflected in our makeup, in our business, in our brands. And how do we do that? By hiring the people who are a part of that 70%. So the numbers is really what's going to speak to that. That's how you influence, by pulling the numbers, pulling the studies, pulling the data, and working that into your pitch to your leaders to get whatever you need to meet that diversity effort. Diversity is not dead. It has a lot more work to do because every century is an evolution of something new, right? And so we have to be sure that we're reflecting that in our teams so that we can reflect that in the customers and the clients that we serve.
Yeah, brilliantly answered again, LaShawn. And I particularly like that numbers or ROI, that even the sleepy old director at the bottom of the table, the boardroom table, will wake into that one. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, what to you is an ideal workplace culture fit for purpose in today's altered world? Can you paint the picture a leader should aim for?
Yeah, the ideal workplace culture is a place where employees are happy, the place where and look forward to coming to work, the place where taking vacation time is encouraged, the place where overtime is not mandated, but people want to drive and push to meet that goal because they're just that passionate about the company that they work for, the place where people are valued because of who they are, the place where people are encouraged to care for one another in different ways other than just pay or money, the place where my benefits reflect my needs, the place where everyone wins at the end of the day because the company is winning and getting what they need, and the employees are happily to do it for them because they feel valued in doing so. So the ideal workplace culture doesn't feel like work. It feels like a second family. It's somewhere that I can go and I know that I'm valued and appreciated. And if I make a mistake, I'm not berated or belittled. I'm encouraged to develop. I'm driven to do better and stretch myself professionally. So ideally, people are happy, whether that's the leader, the managers, the supervisors, and the employees, and we all work well together because we all, at the end of the day, want the same thing, which is for the business to win.
I've got to say, by the way, before we move on to the last question,
Yeah.
all this input you're kind of giving is valued and appreciated. It's brilliant, brilliant. Now, just before we move on to that last question, just to remind viewers and listeners, by the way, I'll read it out, that behind me on the screen, you can find LaShawn's URL, which is the hrplug.com, the hrplug.com. LaShawn, I'd like to give all my guests 3 wishes. It's like a Disney thing. Yeah. If I was to give you those 3 wishes for business leaders to understand the value of sound workplace culture, what would those 3 wishes be?
1, that leaders never stop learning and never and don't underestimate the value in continuing to learn, whether that's through education, whether that's through extra assignments, however you learn. Don't think that the buck stops because you're at a certain level and because you're happy. Learning is a critical skill that leaders have to continually want to do because of change. And that's the second wish, that leaders understand change is inevitable. It's going to happen. Be open to it, embrace it, learn from it. So outside of learning and continuing to do it, and outside of embracing and accepting change, my third wish is that leaders understand the grave importance, Malcolm, of taking care of them. If they don't take care of themselves, if you don't take care of yourself as a leader, and that is your health, your well-being, your mental, take days off, relax. There's no way in the world that you can take care of anybody else. And so if those are my 3 wishes, if I had a perfect world, that leaders will do, because when we do those 3 things, it only prepares us and builds us to be better.
I only wish I'd learned your 3rd wish much earlier in my life. I think I'd be a lot more further on than I am now.
You're doing pretty well, Malcolm.
Yeah, like Shawn Davis of the HR Plug. Yeah. I have thoroughly enjoyed meeting you. Thank you so much for a great interview.
Thank you so much for having me, Malcolm. It's been a great pleasure to really tap into the UK over there and welcome you to your world. And I just really am excited that leaders, you're listening and that you're even taking this step to understand more about leadership, because leadership does matter. And it has to, if you're going to get anywhere in your business or in your personal lives, you got to understand the importance of leadership and what it means. And I'm so glad that you're listening and taking that next step just by listening to this episode, because it's gravely important for you to keep learning, as I said earlier. So thank you so much, Malcolm, for your time and your invitation to join the show. I love what you're doing. I love what you're doing with inspiring, empowering, and enlightening leadership for leaders. So thank you so much.
Oh, I haven't switched the recording off yet. Will you come back again?
Absolutely. You just let me know when you're ready for me.